morning, I saw something on Facebook that in a way I almost don't want to mention because I personally feel like it's like airing dirty laundry, and it's something that we should not even, a lot of folks are like, they would think the opposite. They would think this is a very noble thing, and other things might be airing dirty laundry, but to me this is airing dirty laundry about the Jewish community, about certain aspects of the Jewish community, certain parts of the Jewish community, not the Jewish community as a whole, by any means, but certain segments of the Jewish community is certainly true, or at least they believe ideally it should be true, and so forth. And it goes as follows. So it was a mural in a modern Orthodox Jewish camp, and it said, "We live in America, but our heart is in Israel." I think it was modern Orthodox. It was either modern Orthodox or conservative. I'm not sure. One of the two. Probably modern Orthodox, I'm assuming. You have to understand the difference between modern Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox. For the ultra-Orthodox, the Holy Land is a place of religious devotion, but not of political connection. For the modern Orthodox, there's a conflation of the two. Meaning, it's first and foremost, the Holy Land is a place of religious devotion, but they conflate the politics of the Holy Land with religious devotion. And so it's similar, but not quite the same. But that being said, the ultra-Orthodox would either be categorized, and I made other videos about this, as non-Zionist or anti-Zionist, and the modern Orthodox, for the most part, are religious Zionists. There are those few outliers of the modern Orthodox world who are either anti-Zionist or non-Zionist, and I would really think that there is a large segment of the modern Orthodox community that are just going with the flow and just saying these things to fit in and never really thought about them, and it's just like, yeah, Israel, whatever, and it's an emotional thing, and it's not really real. But there's a lot of intellectual dishonesty vis-a-vis Zionism in the modern Orthodox world. You would think, sociologically, not being familiar with the theology behind it, that if anything, the ultra-Orthodox should be the most Zionist, and the modern Orthodox would be the ones who would question Zionism as being something that's, anachronistic and it doesn't fit into this modern world and so forth, and yet it's just the opposite. The modern Orthodox have a very deep emotional connection to Zionism, and the ultra-Orthodox are generally non-Zionist or anti-Zionist, although there is a type of Zionism creeping into the ultra-Orthodox world, but it takes a different form in a certain sense than it does in the modern Orthodox world for many people, not for everybody. And it's interesting, the sociology behind that as well. And of course there are different forms of Zionism, but I don't think most people think about these things. I don't think most people who will self-identify as Zionists really care about these things. I don't think they've studied the nuances. I certainly haven't, but I am familiar, probably more than most people, with the nuances, between the difference of someone like Herzl and Achad Ha'am and Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik, all having, and Rav Meir Kahane for that matter, each of them having, and Jabotinsky and Begin and whoever it is, each of them having a very different approach to Zionism. And how, and then you have the Jewish left, who will still, for the most part, identify as pro-Israel or pro-Zionist, and yet be in certain ways more anti-Zionist than the most anti-Zionist of the ultra-Orthodox world. That's neither here nor there. That's a different subject. But the question is it appropriate to have a sign like this, and is it appropriate to have these feelings? Two different questions. Meaning, one question is, let's say we do feel this way. We live in America, but our heart is in Israel. Should we write that in English in a place where non-Jewish people can see it? Is it appropriate, if we have this feeling, to advertise it? Or is it airing dirty laundry, essentially, in some form? That's one question. The second question, is it even appropriate to have that feeling? And my answer for, at this moment, that I feel right now, Libi Amar Li, that's all I can say, is that there are fine nuances in this question, and there's no one answer. And people might be shocked because they know that for the most part, people will assume that I'm a strong anti-Zionist, but the fact of the matter is I question Zionism, but I can recognize and respect that there are different views, and I feel that all the different views should be examined and people should come to their own conclusions, and I don't believe that everyone should believe the same thing. You know, I was talking to somebody who lives in Eretz Israel. I won't say lives in Israel, lives in Eretz Israel. I used to think maybe he lives in Israel, now I recognize he lives in Eretz Israel. And there's a nuance and a fine point between those two things. And also, what is the difference between the state of Israel and the land of Israel? What are the differences between these two things? Well, that's neither here nor there. But this fellow, he's a Rosh Yeshiva. He's a friend of mine. From Yeshiva, we learned together in Yeshiva. Now he opened his own Yeshiva. He's a Rosh Yeshiva or a Manalavi Yeshiva. Maybe he wants to. I don't know if he calls himself Rosh Yeshiva. He certainly is a big enough Talmud Chacham to be a Rosh Yeshiva. And the interesting thing was, and I always knew him to be a religious Zionist for the most part, and he was kind of saying some quite anti-Zionist things, very extreme anti-Zionist things in a certain sense. And when I was discussing with him how, there was someone who I was thinking would be appropriate to send him to the yeshiva, but he doesn't want to go to Eretz Israel. He was there for a while, he had bad experience, and he wants to go to America, and so on and so forth. He's coming from England, whatever. It's neither here nor there, but But then he was espousing, he said, maybe he was just trying to impress me or something. He said, the local rabbis say you shouldn't vote, which is, an anti-Zionist stance in Israel, which it can also be questioned, the wisdom behind that, and we can discuss the different issues, but I'm convinced personally that that's the proper approach. But anyway, what I said to him was, I know a particular Hasidic Rebbe in Jerusalem, and he's kind of a hybrid of the two approaches. He doesn't take any money from the government, but he does vote. So he's the, I think that's probably the, that's probably one of the most down-to-earth things I could think of. And it makes sense because his background, he's American originally. He grew up in Babov, which is a very down-to-earth, normal, at least back then it was, community, and it still is. But so this Rebbe, someone approached him and said, Rebbe, what should I do? Should I vote or not vote? And the Rebbe said, what does your father do? Whatever your father does, that's what you should do. And other people were upset. They said, what? Of course, why are you telling him not to vote? I said, I'm not telling him not to vote. I'm telling him not to make fights in his family. I'm telling him to follow his father's minhag. He's coming new, meaning this Rebbe attracted Hasidim. He became a Rebbe because of his father-in-law. And while he didn't get a big number of the Hasidim from his father-in-law, he got some of the most choshev Hasidim from his father-in-law. He respected him very much. So some of the most honored and distinguished members of the community, when his father-in-law passed away, instead of going to one of the sons, went to the son-in-law. But he didn't get a large number, but from himself, from his own charisma and so forth, he managed to develop his own Hasidus. And particularly, there is this truth that someone in America, generally these American Rebbes tend to be more successful than the Israeli Rebbes in attracting new people. Meaning not, if there's a Yerusha, there's a Yerusha. If they inherit Hasidim, that's one thing. But even so, quite often the American Rebbes who inherit Hasidim are also quite successful. You look at the Bayana Rebbe, Stoliner Rebbe. These, they because they're Americans, and then others who start Yesh Ma'ayin and start their own, the Pittsburgher and so forth. They attract people because of their wisdom and so forth. And that comes, from really coming from a more open-minded background, I think, than they would get, in Bnei Brak or Meir Sharon. So the point I'm saying is that not everybody has to be the same, and I think there's tremendous wisdom in that. And in Israel there's this big push that everybody should be the same, and you should fit into a particular box, and there's and in America there's much more independent thought than there is in these other countries. In general, it's not just Israel, it's really all the European countries and so forth have the same problem. I'm going to get to work really early today. Wow. So, that being said, we discussed the difference between what am I talking about? So the question is it appropriate for a Jew to have this expression of, I live in America but my heart is in Israel? And is it appropriate to advertise that? And all I can say, it's not for me to paskin. Everyone really has to find their own approach, but I want to offer things to consider. Now, the first thing that we could discuss is, where does this idea come from, and does it come from a kosher source? Now, just because something comes from a kosher source doesn't mean it hasn't been cooked in a non-kosher pot. That should also be noted. If we find a kosher source for this idea, that doesn't mean that it's currently kosher. but it still might be, and we have to approach these things. So, first of all, what could be a kosher source for this idea? And people are probably aware and familiar with a very famous poem by Rav Yehuda Halevi, who wrote many poems. And Rav Yehuda Halevi wrote a poem that says, Libi b'mizrach, Ani, I think, b'seif ha'marav, emek ha'marav, I said, my heart is in the east, but I find myself, and he nimsa, I don't remember the exact words, but he says, I find myself in the furthest reaches of the west. Now the thing is first of all, we could, since it's poetry, we could understand this perhaps in a poetic way. It doesn't have to be taken in a literal prose fashion. That's the first thing. But at face value, and even he goes on to say that, he would much rather leave the opulent palaces of Spain and behold the ruins of the temple. But the thing is it possible to exist? Meaning, let's put this aside for a moment. Baal Shem Tov many years later said that wherever your thoughts are, you are. And that's a scientific fact. Because whatever you see with your eyes is processed in your brain. Whatever you hear with your ears is processed with your brain. Whatever you smell, feel, all these senses are processed in your brain. So your actual existence in an existential format is in the brain. Metaphorically, the heart was always considered the seat of the mind. Of course, many early scientists believed that and later proved it to be false. But in general, when we hear the word heart in Jewish literature, we can at least say that it poetically or metaphorically represents the mind, brain. And we discussed this actually yesterday. So it's possible to be physically in one place and mentally and emotionally in a different place. And it would seem that Rav Yehuda Halevi set an example that is appropriate, perhaps. But the thing is that if that's the truth, we could physically be anywhere and mentally be right between the wings of the cherubim on top of the Ark of the Covenant at every moment of our lives if we are pious enough. Now, I'm not on that level, but a great tzaddik could do that, and each of us can do that every now and then and give over a Mesiras Meidoah, make statements that to say that all other thoughts are batal, are nullified in comparison to our great desire at the moment when we do meditate on being in the holiest place on earth between the wings of the cherubim, the Ark of the Covenant, Jerusalem, and the temple, even if it's not there right now. Just having in mind in a different time, a different place, because the power of thought is faster than light, is faster than time and space. And we can place ourselves there in the Holy of Holies, even though physically we're not Kohanim Gedolim, we're not the high priest. We don't have the legal permission to enter that place, and it's not Yom Kippur, and this is in Jerusalem. But in our hearts, in our minds, that's where every person could be the high priest, every day could be Yom Kippur, Every place could be the Holy of Holies. Not halachically, but mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. And we can bring ourselves to that place and time in an instant, just in our thoughts. And that's where we are when we think about this. It could be driving on the Palisades, but we could actually be in the Holy of Holies. And the fact of the matter is, we could also be by the Western Wall, or even up on the Temple Mount, and really be on Wall Street, or in Hollywood, or somewhere else, even in Mecca. I mean, there are other human beings who have different thoughts, and there is a certain irreverence to that, and it's a problem. Although I would say each person has their own things they deal with. So that being said, let's examine this question a bit further. So it would seem, though, that there is an appropriate tone to this, to say, I am in the West, my heart is in the East, and we see this from a Rishon, Yehuda Halevi. The fact of the matter is, you can find anti-Zionist things from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as well. You can bring from the Kuzari why it's inappropriate to speak of Vrit, for example. Alright, that's neither here nor there. Tzaddikim brought like that. Just to give some information. I don't even have to speed today. I'm so early for work. So speed limit here is 55. I'm in the right lane. I'm going to go 55, and that's it. Especially there was a cop back there. I better take care of this thing. Now, I think there should also be another. Now, let's look at the other side. It's well known, and this is someone who's highly revered in modern Orthodox circles, of Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, big tzaddik. He was called the Baal Shem Tov of Germany. Rav Hirsch was an anti-Zionist in the time when the early ideas of the Zionist movement, which were widely seen as kosher, like the Chovevei Tzion movement. I mean, people ask what harm could come from an apolitical religious movement like Rav Kalisher, who want to settle the Holy Land in an apolitical way, and yet the Gedolei Harabonim were opposed, including Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. He was strongly opposed to Rav Kalisher's approach, and he had invoked the Shalosh Shavuos, the 3 oaths, which are well known. And he invoked Jeremiah, where Jeremiah said, we are to pray for the peace of whatever city God sent us to, because with their peace comes your peace. And Rav Hirsch points out quite wisely in his famous book Chorev, he said, if that's the case of the Babylonians, who brought us there as slaves against our will and destroyed our temple, and of which we had a clear temporary decree that we knew when 70 years were up we would be allowed to go back. if that's the case, so all the more so today, where we choose where we want to live, and the countries where we live are kind to us, and we don't know when Messiah is going to come. We don't know when this exile is going to end. So all the more so we have to be loyal and patriotic and respectful to the countries where we live in, and pray for their peace, as Jeremiah said, and not be obsessed with an emotional Zionism. That's Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. So who's he going to line about Now, we could say there's the difference between the hot-blooded Spaniard in Rav Yehuda Halevi, who was emotional and poetic, and the cold, calculated German approach of Rav Hirsch. And there are things to say about that. You know, remember the old Pittsburgher Rebbe, he said that the Rambam says a mensch is nimshach acher esfiva. A person is always drawn after his surroundings. And person is drawn after his surroundings, and whatever surrounds him is what he becomes a little bit. And so he says that, you know, he asks the question, why you see, like, you know, Polish Jews and Russian Jews will argue. And he says, well, it's not. When Jews are one nation, and we should all love each other. And he says, well, each person is drawn after his surrounding, and so the Polish Jew has a little Pole inside him, and the Russian Jew has a little Russian inside of him, and it's not the Jews who are fighting, it's the Poles and the Russians who are fighting, because the Jews love each other. And that's what the old Pittsburgher Rebbe said. So anyway, we could say this in a sociological sense and so forth. But it's not. I don't think it's respectful to say that about Gedolim Rishonim, like Rav Yehuda Halevi, and great Gedolei Achronim like Rav Hirsch. So. But we can say Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim in a certain sense, even though really that only refers to Chazal, as the Satmarav points out, divrei Yol. But in a colloquial sense, we can accept that Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Now, I think there's another approach we have to ask about this, and we can say it as follows. The question is, which America and which Israel are we talking about? Because the early founders of America saw themselves as a new Israel, a new Jerusalem. You know, Ben Franklin wasn't a particularly religious man, but he wanted the Great Seal of the United States to be the Israelites crossing the Red Sea. certainly saw, and there were certain early founders who hoped that the national language of the United States would be Hebrew. Certainly the early Puritans identified very strongly with ancient Israel. So which America are we talking about? Are we talking the America of the founders? Are we talking the America of Washington and Jefferson and Franklin? Are we talking the America of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, Federalist Papers, and so forth? Or are we talking about the America of Coca-Cola and Hollywood and some much worse things? Are we talking about the America or the Amreka, the empty people? Because most Israelis, they look at America as the Amreka, as those empty people, and those who love America and want to go to America aren't going because consciously out of respect for Washington or Jefferson, although maybe subconsciously or unawarely there is the roots of what they planted there, but rather this concept of the Amreka. They don't want to, Israelis, they want to come to America because they don't want to be in the army, and they don't want the Israeli army, and they don't want to go through all the crap that they go through in Israel, and they want to escape Israel, but they not to embrace some higher ideal, but rather to seek out more materialism. And if that's the America, now the thing is, but what is Israel? Is Israel ancient Israel? Is Israel Yerushalayim? Is it Eretz Yisrael? Is it Mei Shearim and Bnei Brak, or even Merkaz Harav, places of Torah? Or is it just simply Israel of falafel and Tel Aviv, and Herzl and Ben Gurion, and even Begin and Netanyahu? Which Israel is it? Because in a certain sense there's much more of an affinity between the America of Washington and Jefferson and the Eretz Yisrael, the Yerushalayim of King David of the Bible, and there's also much more of a connection between the empty people of America, the Amreka of Hollywood and Coca-Cola. Nothing against Coca-Cola, but the cultural America, as opposed to the ideals of America, and the albeit different culture of Israel. And in a real sense, if you embrace the real America, you're also embracing the real Israel. And if you're embracing the fake America, you're not embracing the fake Israel, because those two cannot exist in one unit, because they're different. And yet, if you want to say your heart is you living in America, this Amreka, the cultural America, and I don't mean the patriotic cultural America. I mean the keeping up with the Kardashians America, whatever that is. I don't even know what that is. It's just something I heard, and thank God I never saw it. But is that the America that you're talking about? Well, then certainly your heart should be, for sure, in Eretz Israel, but even in Israel. What difference does it make? What has one have value over the other? You know, but we can simultaneously, I feel, embrace the essential ideas of America, which I believe are a culmination of Torah goals in a way that Israel has never dreamt of. Certainly modern Israel has never dreamt of. In a way, the ideals of the American founding were the ideals of King David. The ideals of true egalitarianism, which King David was the symbol of throughout the Renaissance and really throughout Scripture, and even in Deuteronomy, the idea of the righteous king is that he should not lift up his heart over his brethren, that he should not see himself as being better than anyone else, but rather recognize the equality of all of humankind. That's an idea we find already in Deuteronomy. In a sense, America, as it was founded, was supposed to be those ideals, the classical ideals of idealistic biblical Israel. I don't mean in a parochial religious sense. I mean in an idealistic sense of self-government and so forth. And it was a radical idea, but it was really, in a sense, a culmination of what was revealed at Sinai, I believe. You know, the Ariya Kodesh says that when it says in Chazal, Chacham Adif Minavi, that a sage is greater than a prophet, that means that wisdom of common sense and logic supersede even revealed religion in a certain sense, or are greater in a certain sense than revealed religion. And America was founded on those ideals, that the roots were planted in revealed religion, but the fruit that was born of liberty come from logic and wisdom. And so, you know, I ask everyone to reflect on these questions. When you speak of America, which America are you speaking of? And when you speak of Israel, which Israel are you speaking of? And can we break out of the klippas of materialism and embrace the inner spiritual truths? That really, in a sense, both America and Israel represent very deep spiritual truths, but both America and Israel are hidden within a klipa, within a shell of darkness and materialism. And how do we break through those shells and embrace the truth? I'm using Kabbalistic terminology here, but there's deep truth in this. All right. Well, thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. And comment, and let's be in touch, and let's further this discussion even more. God bless. Thank you.